You're on 94.9 this morning. It is 9 minutes past 8, and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International, and he's answering your questions. And we also talk about, stuff in the news and finish talking about stuff we spoke about last week. And, of course, if you do have a question, we'd really appreciate if you can send it through to us. Just send it to our text line. That's SMS 0401 949 949. And Dr. John, we did have a question that's come in after last week, and it was for you. It said, where did all the water go after Noah's flood?
Yeah, well, it ran off into the oceans, and really, as I think Ron Neller pointed out, the global flood of Noah is the only explanation for what we see around us. The carving out of all the valleys and canyons as the mountains were raised up, and the water ran off, and that torrential flow is what carved out the ravines and even things like Jamison Valley and entities like that, and then it ended up in the oceans. So that's where the oceans got filled up from.
Yeah, and of course the Bible talks about at the same time the land was being pushed up at the same time. So we saw the mountains and other things coming up, and I can only assume, he talks about the water coming from the great depths, that all that water that's in that subterranean water that we've talked about, well, we know it's back down there. So
it's still there, yeah.
It's come up and it's probably gone back down again.
Yes. If there's plenty of it, there's a lot of water in the earth.
Yes, absolutely. And now, Dr. John, last week, I asked sort of late in the day a little bit about fear. I was we've seen people sort of freaking out about coronavirus jabs, and these days they're sort of worried about nuclear war and just so many things that people are sort of freaking out about. Now, I don't specifically want to talk about those things, but the fear itself, the fear just seems to be spreading.
Yes, it's all pervasive, Mick, and to me it didn't seem too bad early on in 2020, but then when we got into 2021, it really seemed to ramp up quite a lot, and it's been pretty obvious every time you go out into the shopping centres that a lot of people seem to be extremely fearful.
Yep.
And it's worth having a look at, I think, where fear actually comes from. And from a biblical perspective, it goes right back to the Garden of Eden, because one of the first things that Adam and Eve did after they ate the fruit was that they hid themselves. And Adam said to God, he said, I was afraid. Right? So that was the first thing that happened to him. He became afraid and he hid himself. And so it seems that right at the moment some fear was present. So it does suggest a spiritual entity, something spiritual had happened to Adam and Eve. And, of course, they also knew that they were naked, and they went and made the fig leaf coverings, because they must have lost whatever covering they had. Now, there they were naked, they just weren't aware of it. So they were covered in something, and maybe it was the glory of God that made them unaware of their nakedness. But God had also said, in the day you eat of it, you'll die. So, that's when death entered into them as well, even though they didn't die immediately on the spot. The death and dying process began that very moment. And look, I think there's another very interesting passage of Scripture that links those two things, fear and death and the dying process.
Yep.
And in Hebrews 2:15, we read that Jesus has released us from the fear of death, which is what has kept people in lifelong bondage. So the fear we see all around us seems to me to be the fear of death, presumably because of COVID. And it is an evil spiritual entity. Now, the Bible tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But that really means a reverential fear of God's greatness rather than terror of him. Fear doesn't come from God, but cultures, have assumed that God does bad things to us. I mean, you see that the insurance companies talk about disasters as being an act of God. As if God has been annoyed about something and he's suddenly gone zap and, some terrible disaster has happened. But we don't get that from the Scriptures. But it's also interesting about fear being spiritual, because if we read to what God says to Timothy, he says to Timothy, God hasn't given you a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. Now, why did Paul say that? Now, he said it really because of Timothy's name, because Timothy's name is a combination of two Greek words, Timo, Theos, which really means fear of God or God-fearer. So, we know that Timothy had a Jewish mother and a Jewish grandmother, but he didn't have a Jewish father. And he's been given this Greek name, Timothy, which means God-fearer or fear of God. Yeah. So, wrapped up in his name, Paul's doing a bit of a play upon words here and saying, get rid of the fear of God. God's given you a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. But it does suggest that fear is an evil spirit of some sort, And we also see it in the animal kingdom as well. Animals have this fear and terror of death. So, and we know that Adam and Eve's fall affected the whole of the world, the animal kingdom as well. So, I think fear is an evil spirit. And it's inborn into us, and it only needs something to bring it out. And that's exactly what we've seen, I think, with COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's come back to Dr. John very shortly. It is 17 minutes past 8. If you have any questions about fear, send them through to us. Our text line, SMS, from Creation Ministries International, and I've managed to turn them off, John. It was automatically just sort of a bit like some sort of CD player that wouldn't stop. Dr. John, we've been talking about fear this morning, and I no longer fear that the next song is going to keep playing.
Well, that's progress, Mick.
As far as fear is concerned, it's you were saying it's brought on by sin. That really started the whole fear train, I guess, and it hasn't stopped.
No, it hasn't stopped, and it only, because it's inborn into us, really, that fear that came in right at the fall, it only needs something to bring it out. And that's exactly what we've seen here with COVID and the obvious manipulation of people that I think we've seen with the media. And unfortunately, I think we have to say with the government as well. Because all the talk about the thousands of positive tests and all the deaths, that's all calculated to put fear into people. And we only learnt a week or two ago that the number of those deaths was grossly inflated. That really the number of COVID deaths was only a tiny fraction of what was claimed.
I did have a chat with a friend very recently, Dr. John, who is a professional writer.
Right.
And we were talking about different news stories that people have pointed to saying, that was wrong, and other people saying, that's a really good story. And we were actually looking at some of the media stories and how many stories come out that you have to read the entire story, not just the headline and then sort of skip through it. And you have to look for the words, because somewhere in a lot of stories it says could be, might be, should be, would be. And basically somewhere in the story there's this is not definitive. And that means that the story isn't so much wrong as it's deceptive, because if you read every word you realise, okay, they're not saying this is absolute. And many stories are written that way, so they can't get into trouble, but you have to read every single word to get the meaning.
Oh yeah, but the motive behind it is to instill fear. And of course we do know that the number of deaths, there were many people who died of natural causes, but if there was the slightest hint of COVID, it was listed as a COVID death.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I think that's pretty wicked, and the interesting thing is it was the same worldwide. It happened in every country. The same inflation of death numbers in the other Western countries, and you think, what sort of a coincidence is it that all countries have grossly inflated the number of deaths at the same time? I think that's very, very curious, and that seems wicked to me. And you have to wonder whether it was deliberately designed to make people terrified of a virus that really didn't have such a high death rate, right? And you wonder, why would they do that? Was there some hidden agenda, And the cynic in me makes me think that maybe it was to push vaccination for a virus that wasn't all that deadly. I don't know. That's speculation, and you have to look at why that would be, and I can only go back to what is at the root of all kinds of evil. Yeah. And we all know what that is. It is the word money.
Yep.
And the payoff for the huge pharmaceutical industry must have been enormous. So there might have been a lot of lobbying and handouts, and hopefully the truth will come out. Because
but it's not just COVID. It's not just vaccines. We're seeing this happen across the planet, and fear, as you said earlier, it comes from sin, and it's happening everywhere.
Yeah, but it's obvious that it's been designed to whip it up, like the media. There's no question about that. I think people have seen that, and I'm praying that all the truth will come out, because I really hate lies and deception. And I think we've seen a lot of that, and the problem is lies and deception are all pervasive in our society, including in the realm of science. And that's a point that I wanted to talk about a bit this morning as well.
Yeah, because we live in a fallen world, and sadly, those things happen all the time. Yeah. You're on 94.9. It is 25 from Creation Ministries International. Of course, they have a website, creation.com, where you can go and read about all sorts of things, 13,000 articles on all sorts of stuff. You can get many questions answered. However, if you have a question, chances are a lot of other people have a similar question, and we'd love to hear it. So if you could send it through to our text line, it's 0401 949 949. Now, this morning, Dr. John, we've been talking a bit about fear, and when it comes to the COVID and the vax, and there's two different sides to the story. Actually, there's probably 100 different sides to the story, and we read all different ones all the time. And then in the media just last week, they're talking about death numbers being different, and then we've got the war in Ukraine, and we hear media stories more one side than the other, but I think I saw the Russians were praising, I think it was Fox News in the US, saying, oh yeah, you've got the right idea. There's millions of people in Russia that support Putin. There's a lot of people in Ukraine that support Putin. Now, I have to ask a question. I have had conversations with people that are fearful. Now, often, the fear then brings out anger. They get angry, and they start sort of getting angry about Putin because we see one side of the story. But are all those millions of people completely wrong? Or maybe should we just say, hey, the Bible says do not judge. And we're not in a position where we have all the information or all the correct information, and we can't judge. Yet the fear is there for so many. How do we overcome that fear?
Yeah, well, of course, the short answer to that, Mick, is Jesus said, fear not, don't fear. And he also said, take care that no one deceives you. Mm-hmm. And, we can expect that at this particular time of history, deception is going to be rampant. And I think we've seen that in media manipulation and even governmental manipulation of COVID figures. Who knows what we're seeing really with some of the footage that's available for the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And
I mean, deception, it's only a fairly new thing. It only started with Eve in the garden.
Yeah. It hasn't been around for very long. Only right there at the beginning. But look, Mick, it is all pervasive in our society, you know, and it's there in the realm of science. It's generally accepted that you can't trust too many articles that you read in scientific or medical journals because so many of them get retracted and all of the observations that get reported when people try to repeat the experiments, they're unable to do it. So it's very obvious that the scientist's personal bias is entering into the article that he's published. And even though they're published in supposedly peer-reviewed journals, lots of stuff, the peers might only be a couple of people, and they may not be absolute experts in the field, and these things get published, and quite frankly, they're nonsense. But it even pervades the educational system too, Mick, and we heard the last couple of weeks from Dr. Ron Neller from Creation Ministries, who's a geomorphologist. And he was taught by his professors the party line about the sedimentary rock layers and their fossils, indicating epochs and periods of time and so on, and all caused by floods and natural processes, the sort of processes that we see every day. And he got out in the field and he realised that the evidence simply did not match what he'd been taught. And that founding principle of geology, uniformitarianism, that things have been going along in the same way for donkey's years, millions and billions of years, and the present-day processes are adequate to explain everything that we see around us. And he realised that they just can't explain it. And the only obvious explanation was the global flood that's described in the Bible. Now, how do you get rid of deception and fear? Well, Jesus said he was the truth, and his word is truth. And if we don't believe his word, then we are going to be deceived and we're going to get fearful and all of these sort of things. And, in the realm of science, we wonder why so many scientists are not believers. And the reason is they're taught a complete fabrication by the people that they have respected. All their professors. You think back to your days at school. You thought your teacher was just wonderful. And everything the teacher said, if that was contrary to what your parents said, well, the teacher was right. Because the teacher knows. And even in the biological field, I remember when I wasn't a believer, having discussions with Christians who didn't believe in evolution, and my response was, "What about the evolution of the horse?" Now I didn't know anything about the evolution of the horse, but I'd just seen the drawings in the biology textbooks. And after all, if you can't trust what you read in the textbook, what can you trust? And it was the same for all of the other examples that I saw in the textbooks. I was fascinated by that story about the peppered moths in England. Now, I don't know whether you're familiar with that one, Mick,
no.
but it's been in all the biology textbooks for years. And supposedly there's been a change in the frequency of light moths to dark moths. And the cause was put down to be the Industrial Revolution that blackened the tree trunks with soot. and so the light-coloured moths were easier to spot by the birds when they were resting on the tree trunks, and so the birds came and gobbled up the light-coloured moths. So there was this change in frequency of light to dark, less light, more dark, and this was an example of evolution in action. And I mean, I read that book and I thought, gee, what a fantastic example that is. And it's only in recent years that the truth has actually come out. It really just was a fabrication by the guy who illustrated what he believed, because it turns out that all the photos that were supporting it were fabricated. They were dead moths glued onto appropriately coloured pieces of tree bark and then photographed. And when the researchers tried to repeat the experiments, they couldn't find any evidence of moths resting on trees during the day at all. So it was just the guy's imagination. He thought up this idea, and he fabricated the evidence to suit it. Now, you wouldn't know that, but there those two were, the evolution of the horse and the peppered moths. They were in all the biology textbooks, and so every student of biology for years and years and years was taught this stuff, and the professors taught it and so on. So no wonder, they've been taught untruth. So no wonder they believe in evolution.
And more recently, scientifically, they've proven that they're actually incorrect.
Absolutely. And, the worst one from my perspective was the one of that embryo sequence done by the German embryologist Ernst Haeckel. And, again, that was in all my textbooks, and I was taught how we go through this fish stage and whatever. And it's been known for at least 50 years that the whole idea is nonsense. We don't go through those stages. And the drawings were fabrications, right? When people repeated his experiments and actually took photos of what embryos really do look like at that particular stage of development, what do they find? The drawings don't match up.
Yeah.
So he fudged all the drawings, and yet there they were in every textbook. And the dreadful thing to me is it's still being taught that way in schools. Yeah. You can't believe that biology teachers are still teaching school children something that was known to be in error 50 years ago. Yeah. And I've told the story on this program before. I was up in Canowindra a couple of years ago, and in Canowindra, when they were building a road, they dug up all these fossil fish. Very interesting. And so they built a museum up there, and a lot of school kids go there for excursions and so on. So they've got a classroom in the museum. And there on the wall was the depiction of these embryos as evidence for evolution. So school children are still taught it, and it's nonsense.
Yeah, sad, isn't it? And, of course, fear comes from so many things being, mixed up in our mind, because we don't see the truth. And if we just read the Bible, we'll see the truth, and I guess a lot of that fear will just wash away.
Well, the big problem, Mick, is that because they are taught all this stuff, they end up being believers in evolution, and evolution really is another way of turning people into atheists. So it's a very big block to them turning to God. So, of course, they're going to be full of fear because they've still got the fear of death in them because they have not turned to Jesus, who's the only one who's going to be able to eliminate it. Absolutely. So it's absolutely tragic, Mick.
Yes. You're on 94.9 with Dr. John from Creation Ministries International. It is and Dr. John, you've been talking a lot about fear this morning, and one, where the fear comes from, and two, how to overcome fear.
Yes, and look, I mean... the fear really comes from deception. and fraud, deceit that permeates our societies. And I think if we realised just how much there was, we'd probably be very surprised, because what we read about and hear about in the media, there's so much of it that you simply can't trust. And we really need to get back to our biblical foundations. Jesus said, if you continue in my word, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that truth is going to dispel fear. And we better make sure that everything we believe is founded on him and what he's done for us, because you can trust very little of what you see in the mainstream media. It's not truth. It's propaganda, actually, designed to be manipulative. And, we've seen examples of it even from government organisations, which is absolutely tragic. You wouldn't think that your government was out to deliberately deceive you, but we've seen examples of that, particularly with the manipulation of the figures. So really, if people want to be unafraid, really the only source of absence of fear is the Lord Jesus himself. So I think if you're out there at this point in history and you're not a Christian, you really need to seriously think about it, because things are not going to get better. They're probably going to get very much worse. And the extent of fear in society is only going to increase, and the only way of dispelling it is to be absolutely rock-solid secure in your knowledge of the Lord himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome week, and we'll see you again next week.
I think we're going to have another speaker next week.
Ooh, okay.
Actually, I'll have to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have Dr. Don Batten next week.
All right,
so
exciting.
Anyway, that'll be exciting too. He's a plant biologist.
All right. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Dr. Batten.
John Batten.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Dr. John, and we'll see you in a few weeks' time.
You will.
You're on 94.9. It is 3 minutes to 9. We've got the news and weather coming up soon. But first, we'll have, I think, a bit of Owl City with meteor shower. And, of course, there's plenty of showers going on outside at the moment. With the weatherman now saying showers right through till Saturday. 10 to 20 mil today, 5 to 10 mil every other day, and then possible showers Sunday and Monday with potentially 1 to 5 millimetres. So, yeah, still plenty of rain in the forecast. You're on 94.9. Good morning.